We're excited to hear from them and to just kind of hear what they're saying. And I think you guys can take it away. Thanks for being here.
Awesome. Thank you, Augie. So today, I'm Tristan Harris. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator with the Climate Action Division at the City of Boise and Earth to Sky's newest member. So I do some work that's dedicated to making climate science interpretive for everyone, and climate specifically is one of the most burning topics in my field. Haha, throwing in the fire puns already. And this workshop specifically will aim to help educators and communicators like yourself to get some new voices and some new tools under your belt to interact with fire in a brand new way. And so our goal is to equip you with the tool of storytelling and build your confidence in these interpretive skills around storytelling and provide, like I said, that new way to inspire, ignite some new voices around climate and fire. So to do that, we are going to have a kind of wide storytelling background from Kayla. This is her specialty. And then we are going to have an interactive workshop where you do a hands-on activity. And for that, we will actually need something to write with, a pen and paper, or just on your laptop. Or if you just want to take mental notes, if you're on the go, then that works too. Then we will actually do a breakout session where we share stories in smaller groups, and then a larger group storytelling opportunity, and just invite you to that space to share out after we develop your fire story. So we'll also provide you with some tips and tricks to facilitate this and take this home with you after the webinar, and then leave space for any questions and answers, burning questions and answers. Take it away, Kayla.
Great. Thank you, Tristan. So I think I've probably introduced myself to all of you at this point, but my name is Kayla Bordelon. I'm a PhD student. I study storytelling pedagogy and fire science education, and I'm at the University of Idaho's Interdisciplinary Confluence Lab. So Tristan asked me to provide a little bit of background on kind of why we're even interested in storytelling in science education spaces. So I'm going to offer kind of 3 reasons why I think storytelling can be a really powerful approach. First of all, stories are just efficient. Human beings are hardwired to the story form. For as long as we've been on Earth, we've been telling stories to each other. And the research is finding that we just process the narrative form more efficiently than we do other forms of communication. We read stories faster, we comprehend them more easily, and we remember more from stories than we do from expository information. Secondly, stories are an integrative form of knowledge. So they engage both the analytical processing system in our brain, as well as the kind of experiential, emotional processing system, which is more instinctual. So what this does is it allows us to bridge science and our lives, our everyday experiences through story. And then finally, stories have the potential to challenge STEM cultural norms. And Tristan, if you could advance the slide, I'm just going to talk a bit more about that. So when we think about broadening participation in STEM, we often think about recruiting more diverse participants into our STEM programming. But we also need to look internally at the practices that we use to engage participants with science. Because despite science often being represented as objective or acultural, science itself is a cultural practice. And scholars are finding that science communication often reflects the cultural norms of the community that institutionalized Western science. That's male, white, Western, privileged, with cultural norms characterized by competition, objectivity, individualism, verbal debate, and these dualities between nature and culture, or reason and emotion, animate and inanimate. When we use storytelling, we can challenge some of these norms. Stories certainly require an intermingling of reason and emotion. And stories are never objective. There's always a point of view, always a narrator, and where it's offered from a subjective perspective. And stories have the power to challenge some of these other cultural norms of science as well, depending on like the type of story that's being told and also who the storyteller is. I want to say something else about that. Tristan, great. So when we think about the power of story to increase relevance and to invite new ways of being and belonging and representing science, we should be thinking also about whose stories are being told. So often when we talk about storytelling in science spaces, we think about the educator or the scientist as the storyteller. And they're kind of the expert, and the knowledge flow goes to a more or less passive audience, the recipients of the story. And while that can be a really powerful tool for connecting with our audiences or our students, we're also interested in a different model where the educator is actually the facilitator of stories that are told by our audiences, by our students or our visitors. And this allows our visitors or our audiences' lived experiences to be the basis for the ideas that we're exchanging. So this really allows for more co-creation of knowledge. And if you'll advance once more, Tristan, this is kind of what I'm looking at in my dissertation work. So my work is part of a larger project based at the Confluence Lab at the University of Idaho and funded by the National Science Foundation. And it's called Stories of Fire, Participatory Storytelling in Fire Science Communication. So what we're really looking at here is how is science embedded in our stories of lived experiences with fire in the West? And how can we leverage those experiences and our stories about them to improve learning outcomes? So those learning outcomes that we're looking at, we're trying to see if there's potential of this participatory storytelling approach, this facilitated storytelling in informal fire science education to bridge science and our everyday experiences, our lives, to facilitate science learning and to expand the cultural norms of STEM. So we're experimenting with a pedagogy that's based on the ACE, or Audience-Centered Experiences model of the National Park Service Interpreter Division. And we'll provide a link to that later in today's session. And we're going to be piloting this approach at 5 sites of informal learning here in Idaho this summer. So hopefully this fall, I'll be able to report back to this group and let you know what we find out. And today, Tristan is going to be using another approach that's been adapted from the Climate Stories Project in order to help us build our personal stories of fire based on our personal experiences. And then hopefully this will encourage you, this is kind of a modeling of what you could do with your students or audiences and help elicit their stories of fire. So I'll hand it back to Tristan.
Great, thanks, Kayla. I just wanted to give a moment to pause. I'm going to dive a little bit more to what a fire story is, what it looks like, and then craft your own. But just wanted to check in if you had any questions about the background to how we got here. Kayla's had some amazing experience here, and I had some training on this same topic and actual facilitation through the Climate Stories Project, which is an international platform that we're kind of modeling this after. But before we dive into what it looks like, just wanted to see if there are any questions.
Yeah, and certainly after you craft your own stories, we're happy to answer questions then too.
All right, great. Well, thank you, Kayla, again. Um, a fire story is that first person narrative that Kayla introduced to us. A fire story, like Kayla had said, bridges that gap between fire impacts and influences happening now in our communities in Idaho or in the spaces that you're at. And it connects our emotions, our experiences, but also inspires some kind of action that may come from it. So folks can tell their stories not only through this written prompt and activity that we're about to do, but can actually turn it into a visual piece of art, a video, a physical or performing art. That can be songs, or I've seen some podcasts, some fun storytelling like playwright videos, and some actual pieces of art that you see displayed here. That top picture is a graph of fire and atmospheric levels, ocean acidification levels, all kind of drawn up into a photo there. And so these can look like a variety of things. There's no one way to do this, but the way that we're going to do that today is through that written activity. So if you hadn't had the opportunity to grab something to write with or something to type with, please do so now. And then just as a reminder, for more examples, we'll share links with you later, but we really want to dive into your stories. So now that we're going to craft your own, I am going to walk through a series of 4 questions, and I'll put one up on the presentation at a time and then give you a couple minutes to work off that example. So it'll be a free write, 4 questions, each about 2 minutes. And I'll also provide my personal narrative as a bit of an example. So if you don't mind giving me a little bit of some verbal or physical cues during this, if you have the buttons on your screen, like a thumbs up, or if you can actually give me a thumbs up or a nod, those would be amazing. So is everyone kind of ready to start the activity? Cool. All right, so our first question is to describe something in your environment or community, or the place that you love that is meaningful to you, that has been influenced by fire. As an example, for me, this is the Boise foothills. The Boise foothills has always been my place to go as a place of exercise, emotional healing, and a community space for my friends and my loved ones to get together. And this has been influenced by fire. The next question, we'll talk about how specifically, but for now, write about the place that is meaningful to you. I'll give you about 2 minutes. And you can give me a thumbs up when you're done. All right, go ahead and wrap up. any thoughts that you have about the place that's meaningful to you. And something that I didn't do before this first question was just invite you all to this space when we're talking about storytelling, when we're talking about specifically fire or climate. This space can be challenging, and it can also be a very vulnerable space. So I just want to acknowledge that, and a good practice to do before these activities is to invite everyone and let them know that when we talk about the influences or the emotions that accompany potential influences from fire, that vulnerability sometimes makes us feel like it's negative or bad in some way, but just reminding them that everyone feels that, treating that with empathy, and that we can take what could have been negative feelings and turn them around, or let them be as they are, but just create a welcoming space for that. So our next question is, what is a way that fire has influenced this place or may influence this place? So thinking about it in the context of maybe the past, the present, or the future. And for me, fire has influenced the Boise foothills, my sacred place, because of the air quality. When air quality is really poor in summertime, it prevents me, my loved ones, and those that are more vulnerable of enjoying this space. And that has effects beyond just the lack of exercise, but the mental health effects and potentially direct physical health effects to the elderly, family members, those with asthma, and then my dogs who can't go out and enjoy the air. So please take about 2 minutes to write about what way fire may have influenced this place. I'll give you about 30 more seconds. I also want to remind everyone that sometimes the influences or how we respond to influences may not be this traditional negative thing. Some folks may have exciting experiences, be eager to teach about fire. Some folks may like to be on the front lines of fire and get excited to go out and be, for example, firefighters. So this can really look like many different things. All right, wrapping that one up. Thinking about the influences, now let's talk about how we feel about these potential changes that may have occurred in the past, present, or future. So for me, my feelings were on that side of gloom and anxiety and worry. However, working through climate stories and the work at the city, and then this workshop included learning about fire and kind of reshaping my lens that I can feel hope and drive to come up with solutions and to share my story. So I kind of was able to shift my feelings, and I'll talk about that a little bit more after this prompt. So about 2 minutes to write about your feelings about fire. Give me a thumbs up when you're done. I'll give you about 30 seconds to wrap up your thoughts. All right. Now let's think about the ways that you're navigating your relationship with fire, potentially envisioning a positive future, shifting your feelings, or creating a community solution. So taking whatever you felt and potentially turning it into some kind of action. Now, I want to remind you that there is nothing wrong with just creating your fire story and sharing your story or facilitating others being that action. That's actually one of the top climate actions in the world, is just talking about it. So that is my action about fire, is to share my fire story. And as I had mentioned, I was able to take the fear that I had. I was particularly worried about my future potential family that I might raise in this Northwest Idaho area. And if we were going to see more fires, that being a threat. Instead of allowing that to change my hopes, I used it to fuel, fire pun, my hopes, and have climate and fire stories be my solution and call to action. So you've got 2 minutes to write about your connection, maybe a vision you have for the future. Give me a thumbs up when you're wrapping up. All right, about 30 more seconds, a few more seconds to wrap up your thoughts here. And give yourselves a nice pat on the back because you just built your fire story. I appreciate you all participating in this and being vulnerable with this topic. Next, we are going to go into breakout sessions and share about what you just wrote, your fire story, and then we'll come back together and see if we have any volunteers to share out to the group.
Yeah, thanks, Tristan. That's great. I'm putting together the breakout rooms. There's going to be 3 or 4 folks in each room, and we'll have about 10 minutes in the breakout room. So in a room with 3, that's about 2 or 3 minutes each to share kind of the kernel of a story that you have going so far. So you can use that time to just launch right in and go straight into storytelling mode, or kind of walk through it at more of as an outline if that feels more comfortable. But this is just an exchange of ideas. So yeah, just remember to be active listeners for each other and enjoy hearing each other's stories. So we'll pull you back in about 10 minutes.
That was awesome. Thank you all so much for opening up and being willing to participate and share some really personal stories. I had some awesome questions that I think I'll bring back up a little bit after, but I just want to give some space for everyone to share or nominate someone to share, but do not feel obligated. And we'll just use the hand raise feature if you'd like to volunteer.
Yeah, we have about, I guess about 10 minutes to share some stories. So maybe if you have a 2-minute or less story, or you can give us a clip.
I don't want to tell my story, but I do want to say one thing. It is amazing how many people are living with fire. It just sort of become, it's our backdrop now. It's pretty amazing. That's all I'll say.
Yeah. Can I just see like thumbs up or a hand raise of how many people have a fire story? Yeah, cool. And the stories that I heard came both from the Northwest region and also from the Midwest, Alaska, and other places as well. And certainly different types of relationships with fire, from prescribed burns to runaway campfires to larger scale wildfires.
Something that I appreciate too is with some folks from the Midwest or the East Coast who haven't had as much like direct experience with fire, especially over the last several years, we're able to draw some connections and observations that they've had even from their spaces.
Yeah.
And no worries if you don't want to share. You might prod Kayla or Augie to share theirs.
I can share what I've got written down here. My chicken scratch. This is really fun, and this is a relatively new fire story for me, and actually isn't something that sometimes makes me emotional. So hopefully, we keep it together. But yeah, I mean, I'm studying fire science education, and this fall I was writing my dissertation proposal on this, and my experience with fire in the past has been fairly theoretical. I grew up in a firefighting family, but really fire was always kind of out there. And we thought of fire as an ecological process, and and also for a lot of my family as a way to make a living in the summer. So this year I had the opportunity to spend a lot of time where I grew up, which is on the western slopes of the Cascade Mountains. It's a place that's wet year round, and it's just lush and green. And I mean, there's moss so thick that you can kind of use it as a mattress, but it would probably get you wet about all year round. It's not a place that has frequent fire. But over Labor Day weekend, we had a really crazy windstorm, and I was in Idaho, but my parents called to say that they'd been evacuated because of a fire. And this fire had moved like 80 miles over one night. It ripped straight across the Cascade Range and burned straight down the Santiam Valley. And the Santiam Valley is where I grew up mushroom hunting and swimming. And this was kind of our place that we spent our childhood. And it hadn't burned in our lifetime. One thing I really remember from that week when I was watching the fire spread on this little mapping app I have is that I watched it spread straight across all my little pin drops where it said like great chanterelle spot here or cool swimming hole here. And it was just watching it kind of sweep across all of these memories that are really important to me. And it really did feel like loss, even though I have this scientific understanding of fire as renewal. And so the last part of this is, what do we do with these feelings? And for me, it's really helped me relate to the people that I've been interviewing about fire in Idaho. I maybe have had the tendency in the past to move quickly towards, but fire is good and we need fire and fire exclusion is bad. And this has really allowed me to cry with people who have lost their homes or worry together about the future of our places, the places that we love. And it also, I think, has helped me engage more deeply with how do we create positive change, because it's really made this question about the future of fire in the Northwest, linked it closely with my own kind of survival in this place. So that's my story. Thanks for the claps. Maybe one, I don't know, if one other person would want to share.
I can go, but I would also love to encourage someone else, because I think I've talked about my fire story a bit already. So if anyone is, I know it is hard sometimes and it does feel a little bit weird to be vulnerable in a virtual world, but I would encourage, if anyone else wants to go, please go.
Isaac? Okay. Michelle?
Go Isaac. Go Isaac.
We got a Midwestern story coming up for y'all.
Yeah, so I was just gonna say, like, my story is like really different, I think, than the perspectives that some folks might have, like coming from the West. So I like grew up in Iowa, and I was telling people that the first time that I like held a drip torch, I was like 6 or 7 years old. My family like has been putting prescribed fire on like on the landscape on the old farm since for as long as I can remember. And so I always thought about fire as like, there isn't enough of it, like, because there hasn't been fire on the ground really in the Midwest in a substantial way in like 100 or 150 years. And so like that was kind of my dominant paradigm, I guess, for thinking about fire and engaging with it. And then moving out to the West has been a really big and eye-opening experience for me to like come to understand that, like, yes, we probably do need more fire on the landscape, but it is like, it's the way that that fire happens in the West is so different than what I experienced like growing up. And like the potential for like something to go from being just in your backyard to 100,000 acres is just like, it makes it a lot more understandable, I guess, to like see and interact with people who have like really negative impressions of fire. and like just in the past year as well, like have seen some places that are really important to me burn here in the West as well. And so it's one thing that I try to think about when I'm like teaching is like, how do you bring both of those perspectives together? And like what sort of social work needs to happen, as well as like physical and ecological work, in order to like bring fire back onto the landscape in a way that like is like socially acceptable as well as like physically possible. So that was one thing that I was thinking about here.
Thank you. Those were amazing stories, and yes, such diverse perspectives among this group too, which was really, really great to hear. Something that Kathy actually brought up in the group that I was in was this kind of sense of, and Kayla mentioned this too, of like dichotomy that has ruled a lot of our science and STEM and practices. And we can see that here with this fire idea, right? Being good or bad. And I think something that we can all do and are doing in this space right now are embracing the fact that it's okay to have this sort of ambivalence and sway and different feelings around fire. And we can actually unite that with these potential solutions, whether it's just talking about it or making, some more action come from that. And so Kathy asked the question, how do we share this in our, whether it's formal or informal spaces? And that's the next thing that we're going to talk about here. So let me share again with you the screen and go into facilitating climate stories. So the activity that we did is a model that you can use. You can adapt it. It can be that written activity, a group activity. In the formal education space, something that you can do is use this, of course, as a literature tool, right? But trying to go outside of that frame of mind and move it into the sciences and the arts and other disciplines, using stories to set the stage for the other content that you're using. So whether that's, a math example that the story problem talks about something in this atmosphere, whether that's the art piece that they actually create from this fire story, or moving into the informal education realm of having dialogue in your interpretive talks. That's something that Kayla mentioned and that we'll provide more resources on how to facilitate that. And then creating activities that may actually have some sort of exhibit or display that lives on. So having people also feel like they have the opportunity to provide something such as a historic archive of their story, which is a piece of science, or an art or museum display. And a great example of that, if you haven't had the opportunity to see it, if you do live in the Boise, Idaho area, the Idaho State Museum actually has a whole fire display of one of the largest fires, quotes from the time, which was decades ago, and some firefighting information, and provides those different perspectives. And then in communications, we can use this for policy, research, and engagement. And the question that was asked was, well, how do we really do this in the lens of STEM? And my kind of advice in that, and I'm sure Kayla could provide some more, is to use this as supportive information and information that makes these topics really personal and connects the dots for your audiences. So for example, in our group, we also talked about bark beetles in fire and climate. And so being able to provide a personal narrative before you dive into the science of bark beetles and your surroundings, that personal narrative is going to build your audience's intrigue, and it's going to get their emotions running, and it's going to really resonate that experience and help them digest, interact, and remember whatever educational content that you're sharing. So that's my perspective there. Do you have anything to add to that, Keela?
Yeah, I think we can think of story also as having science embedded in it. So let's see, for example, Andrew, or Drew, sorry, if you don't mind me sharing a little bit of your story, is that okay? Is that okay with you? Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Any particular component of it, or?
So Drew mentioned that place that he really loved burned, and the fire effects were full severity. So the trees were totally charred. Mm-hmm. So we can look at that as a characteristic of that fire. And we can think about that and maybe contextualize it and think, is that characteristic of the fire regime? So perhaps in that place, the historic fire regime was one of low severity fire, and but Drew experienced a high severity fire. So the facilitator is able to contextualize this nugget that the storyteller has provided about the severity of this fire, and then expand either the timeline or expand the context to help embed it within the surrounding fire science. So that's another way that we can use storytelling to kind of build out fire science education.
I love that. Any other questions about facilitating, what that might look like, how it might go? I will just provide some more tips and tricks, and then that resource list, of course, the PowerPoint, so we can follow up with the actual links, but want to make sure there's any space for dialogue here.
I actually have a question. I think these fire stories are great, and I think the personal narrative is a really, really powerful format. But I wonder, how do you, I'm just thinking, when some people lose family members in fires, people lose entire communities in fires. I mean, just flattened down to nothing. And these things are just horrendous. And I'm just trying to figure out, how do you facilitate that really pretty staggering sense of loss? Have you run into those sorts of interactions with people? And how do you sort of support that conversation?
Ruth, that's honestly a really open question for us, at least in our research right now. We've thought about, there's some tools from kind of the conflict resolution world around active listening and honoring the emotional space that is created, but it's not something that I feel like we've really sorted out. And it's not something we've necessarily run into in an educational space. I do think that people self-select how deep that they want to go, yeah, in these spaces. But that's not to say that we shouldn't try to create a supportive space where they could be, where their grief could be present.
I mean, just having gone California, we've just taken a beating out here, and I would imagine doing a program like this, you might really encounter people who have dealt with some pretty high levels of loss, and it's hard to keep it, sort of scientific and positive, and it's I'm just trying to think how you could use it just as a facilitator, to be prepared for that and to try to figure out how you do create a safe space to have that conversation and kind of show that level of
Yeah, it would certainly require a facilitator to read the room and not pivot to the positive, right? Like you wouldn't necessarily want to say, thank you for your story, and now let me tell you how great fire is and how much more we need, But
I also wonder, just in a formal education setting where people don't have a choice about being in the room, whether or not, I mean, I'm using probing into a really deep emotional space as a mechanism for building relevance of a scientific topic seems to me like it could be both dangerous and harmful.
Yeah.
Yeah, so some great tools. Before you start your activity, invite people into the space. A couple of really good practices are, one, to make everyone know that they do not have to participate. And if you are in a setting that it could be triggering and emotionally traumatic for people, to state that, to give a warning for that, and to say, we're entering in a space about fire. And if you have a personal experience, you know, let's work together and make sure that either you're comfortable or that you have an out from this space, and you do not have to participate. If you choose to participate, just, you know, welcoming that it is a place of empathy and active listening, and setting group norms. So while we did this, as you had some context to this conversation, normally I would provide a little bit more like group bonding and context to it, so that we set up those norms and make sure that everyone has a safe way to enter the conversation and a safe way to exit the conversation. And that if anyone is participating and listening, that you reflect that back. And like Kayla said, don't pivot away. If someone is feeling depressed and anxious, imagine it like a therapist, right? Like if a therapist just goes, oh, well, you're fine. Like, oh, it's all fine. Well, here are these positives. Like, oh, let's just move on, right? You'd be like, I'm going to fire this therapist. So just thinking of it like, let's hear it. Let's listen and provide that it's okay to feel that way. And then saying, you know, even if you remain with those feelings, what is one thing that we can do to move your story forward in some capacity, if you get to that kind of fourth question of that facilitation that we did. And reminding that even just talking about it is a solution. So any more questions? We're right at time here.
I think we should probably move to Augie's closeout, just so we just respect everyone's time.
Yeah, type questions in the chat. We can like email back,
and we can hang around too afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And then so I also wanted to just add, if you need any help creating practical applications with this information, or if you want access to any tools or resources, or help just building either curriculum or building lessons, or really anything, feel free to reach out to us. That's really what we're doing with this ETS program, and we can always connect you with the right people or connect you with ourselves, and get you the products that you need, especially the communication and the science communication products. So thank you guys all for being a part of Ignite and helping us really start this program here in Idaho, the ETS program. We would love to stay in touch with you and inform you on other opportunities that are coming up. So if you filled in your email and indicated that you did want to hear from us in the future, you're good to go. We're going to have an email list, and we're not going to bombard you, but we are just going to update people on stuff that we're doing, and welcome you to apply or to join. So keep that in mind. And if you want to be on that list, just email me or Kayla or Tristan, and we will make sure you're on that list with us or with everyone else. The final thing is evaluations make us all better, and they make us better, and they make what we offer better. So if you have 3 minutes at the end of this, we would so appreciate it if you filled out the evaluation and following the link that's in the chat. And then we'll also send out the evaluation with an email, a thank you email tomorrow. And so please fill that out for us so that we can really refine what we're doing and make sure that we are getting you guys the product that you need. So that's kind of my spiel, and I just, from the bottom of my heart, thank you guys so much for being a part of this.
Thank you all. Appreciate your stories today too. Bye.